Welcome to this video where we explain how to migrate a virtual machine from VMware ESXi to Proxmox using two methods. Let's start with method 1. First, we need to enable SSH access on the ESXi host. Log in to VMware host client and go to host, then manage. Select the Services tab and locate the TSM SSH service. Right-click the TSM SSH service and click Start to start the service immediately. You can right-click the TSM SSH service and change the service start policy by selecting Policy, then Start and Stop with Host. In this case, the SSH server service will start automatically with the ESXi host. Check the hardware configuration of the original VMware VM and note down this data somewhere. You will need to recreate a similar VM hardware configuration for the destination VM on the Proxmox server for the migration. In this walkthrough, we're migrating a Windows Server 2022 VM to a Proxmox host. Select the original VM in the left pane of the web interface of VMware Host Client or VMware vSphere Client and check Data in the Hardware Configuration section. You can click Edit VM Settings to see more VM configuration parameters. Check whether UEFI or BIOS is set up in the VM settings because this setting impacts the guest OS boot. You can select the UEFI BIOS settings in the VM options. BIOS is selected in the settings of the original VMware VM residing on the ESXi host. This means that we will need to select BIOS in the VM settings of the destination VM on the Proxmox server. Disconnect any CD/DVD images or disks from the original VM. It is recommended that you uninstall VMware tools on the VM before migration. You can also do it after VM migration. The 30 GB source virtual disk is then provisioned in our case. Create a new VM on the Proxmox server with the same parameters as the original VMware VM on the ESXi host. That is, the same parameters for CPU, memory, network cards and virtual disks. Right-click the Proxmox host in the left pane of the Proxmox web interface and click Create VM. In the General tab of the Create Virtual Machine wizard, set the needed parameters, such as Proxmox host, VM ID, VM name, and so on. PVE is the name of our Proxmox host. Let's use VM ID 101. Our VM name on the Proxmox host will be Server 2022. Click Next to continue. Select Do not use any media because we will migrate the VM but won't install a guest OS from CD/DVD media. At the OS step, select the same guest OS that was set for the original VMware VM. In this case, it's Windows Server 2022. The next step is System. Select BIOS if the original VM uses BIOS or select UEFI if the original VM uses UEFI. Optionally, you can select a SCSI controller. Deselect the Add TPM checkbox if you're not using TPM on the virtual TPM module. Click Next to continue. By default, a new virtual disk is created when creating a new VM in Proxmox. Let's set the disk size to 1 GB because this empty virtual disk is temporary, and we will delete this disk after finishing the VM migration. Let's use a SATA virtual disk controller. Click Next. Set the same CPU settings as on the original VM. In this example, we use one processor with 2 cores. We won't edit extra CPU flags and hit Next. Set the amount of memory for the new VM. Let's set the same amount as for the original VM. Click Next. Select the needed virtual network mode such as bridged or NAT. We select a bridged network. Optionally, you can select a virtual network adapter model. Click Next to continue. Review the VM settings, and if everything is correct, click Finish. Wait until the new VM is created. You can check the VM configuration. As we can see, there is a 1 GB virtual disk in the VM configuration. We need to import the virtual disk from the original VMware VM and then we will delete this 1 GB disk. Connect to the Proxmox host's console via SSH or click the Shell button in the Proxmox web interface. Go to the directory of the new VM. In this example, the path to the virtual disks of this VM is /mnt/datastore/datastore55/images/101. Let's view the contents of the VM directory. There is one virtual disk file in QCOW2 format which is native for Proxmox and KVM. This is the 1 GB virtual disk file. Next, we need to import the virtual disk from the original VM residing on the ESXi host. Check the IP address of your ESXi host. In our case, the ESXi host's IP address is 192.168.101.31. Connect to the ESXi host via SSH from the Proxmox host in the command line as shown. Type yes and hit enter to accept the fingerprint and continue. Enter the ESXi host's root password. Check the contents of the original VM directory on the source datastore of the ESXi host with the command as shown. You have the files of the original virtual machine in the specified VM directory. We need the virtual disk files, that is, the virtual disk descriptor file and the virtual disk raw data file. These files are .vmdk and flat.vmdk respectively. The thin provision virtual disk size is about 24 GB. Remember the path to these virtual disk files on the ESXi datastore and the file names. We will copy these files to the Proxmox datastore. If the original VM has multiple virtual disks, you need to copy all of them. Once the needed virtual disk files have been located, you can exit the SSH session and close the SSH connection to the source ESXi host. Now, we're in the destination VM directory on the Proxmox host, that's the VM we have just created. Copy the first VMX file from the source ESXi datastore via SCP. You must specify the root username on the ESXi host from which to copy the file, the IP address of the ESXi host and the path to the file on the ESXi datastore where the source VM files are located as shown. The dot character means that the destination directory to copy the file is the current directory. This is the destination VM directory on Proxmox in our case. If you encounter an error, then specify the full destination path instead of the dot character. Enter the ESXi root password when prompted. The WinServer2022.vmdk file has been copied. Similarly, copy the flat.vmdk file from the ESXi datastore to the VM directory on the Proxmox host. The flat.vmdk file is a virtual disk raw data file used by VMware VMs. Enter the ESXi root password. Wait until the flat.vmdk file is copied. The time depends on the file size and network speed. The file has been copied. Verify that everything is correct and list files in the destination directory. We have copied all the needed files of the source VM, that's the .vmdk and flat.vmdk virtual disk files. If you select UEFI with TPM instead of BIOS in the VM settings, two small virtual disks can be created for VM boot in the UEFI mode and for the virtual TPM module. Using TPM is not recommended when migrating VMs. If we check the VM configuration in the Proxmox web interface after copying the virtual disk files, we see no changes, and no new virtual disks are displayed. Use the QM rescan command to rescan VM storage and update virtual disk files to be displayed in the web interface. As we can see in the output, two files were added to the updated VM config. VMDK is the native format of VMware virtual disks used by VMware virtual machines. Proxmox VMs support VMDK files and can work with them. However, let's convert the virtual disk from VMDK format to the native Proxmox and KVM QCOW2 format. Use the appropriate command to convert the virtual disk as shown, where WinServer2022.vmdk is the source or input file and WinServer2022.QCOW2 is the target or output file. Note that the original virtual disk on the source ESXi datastore is thin provisioned, and its maximum size is 30 GB. After copying this thin provisioned virtual disk to the Proxmox host, its size is 30 GB as it was thick provisioned. The actual size of the thin provisioned virtual disk file is not displayed in the web interface of the VMware host client. You can check the amount of space used by a thin provisioned virtual disk in the ESXi command line with the do-h command in the VMware VM directory. Note that after running the QM rescan command, the imported virtual disk files are displayed as unused in VM configuration. Finally, press Enter to execute the command and convert the virtual disk from the VMDK format to a thin provisioned virtual disk in QCOW2 format. And wait until the virtual disk is converted. Let's check the contents of the Proxmox VM directory and the file size. The virtual disk has been converted to a thin provisioned virtual disk in QCOW2 format. The size of the thin provisioned virtual disk is about 14 GB. Unused blocks were unmapped during the conversion. 14 GB of used space is lower than the maximum of 30 GB for a thin provisioned virtual disk. Update the virtual disk configuration for the VM with the QM rescan command. The VM configuration has been updated. Now, the converted thin provisioned virtual disk in QCOW2 format is displayed in the Proxmox web interface. The disk status is unused. It's time to attach the imported and converted virtual disk to the Proxmox VM. In the VM hardware configuration, select the converted unused virtual disk and click Edit. We ensure that the correct virtual disk image is selected. Click Add to add the unused virtual disk to the VM. Now, the virtual disk imported from ESXi and converted to the Proxmox and KVM format is displayed in the VM configuration as attached. We can detach and delete the temporary 1 GB virtual disk created in the beginning when we created the new empty Proxmox VM. Similarly, we can delete VMDK virtual disk files copied from ESXi to Proxmox before the virtual disk conversion. The VM configuration is correct and doesn't contain redundant or temporary virtual disk files. We can check the contents of the Proxmox VM directory with ID 101 to ensure that only the needed virtual disks are stored. As designed, there is one virtual disk file called WinServer2022.qcow2, which is thin provisioned. We need to configure virtual machine boot options before starting the VM after migration from ESXi to Proxmox. Select the VM, go to Options, and double-click Boot Order. In the Boot Order window, select the imported virtual disk. Then, drag and drop the virtual disk to the top. Select the checkbox at the imported virtual disk. Deselect checkboxes for the unneeded boot options such as CD-ROM and network boot. Click OK to save the boot order settings and close the boot order window. We can check the VM configuration once again, and then we're ready to start the VM migrated to Proxmox. Select the VM and click the Start button in the top right corner of the Proxmox web interface. The imported Windows Server 2022 VM is booting. You can select VNC connection options in the left panel. Send Alt plus Control plus Delete to the VM and go to the login screen. Enter the user password. The virtual machine has booted successfully after the migration from ESXi to Proxmox. You can monitor the VM resource usage in the Proxmox web interface. To finish the VM migration from ESXi to Proxmox, we need to install the VirtIO drivers in the guest operating system. VirtIO drivers are the analog of VMware tools for Proxmox to improve the VM performance and user experience. Download the VirtIO drivers from the official Proxmox website. We need to download VirtIO drivers for Windows in this example. Select a location to save the ISO file on your computer. Wait until the ISO file is downloaded. The ISO file with VirtIO drivers for Windows has been downloaded successfully. Select a datastore attached to the Proxmox host to upload the ISO file. We are going to upload the ISO file with VirtIO drivers to the local datastore on the Proxmox host. Select a datastore, go to the ISO images section and click Upload. Click Select Files. Select the VirtIO drivers ISO file in the directory where you downloaded this file to upload the ISO file to the Proxmox host. Once the ISO file has been selected, click Upload. Wait until the file is uploaded to the Proxmox datastore. In the output, we can see that the file has been copied successfully. The ISO image containing VirtIO drivers for Windows guests is now available in the Proxmox datastore. Select the imported VM, go to Hardware Settings and double-click the CD/DVD drive. Click Use CD/DVD Disk Image File, ISO. Select a datastore with ISO files in the Storage drop-down list. Select the ISO image containing VirtIO drivers. Click OK. The ISO image is now attached to the virtual DVD drive of the virtual machine. Go to the interface of the guest operating system of the migrated VM where we need to install the VirtIO drivers. If you did not uninstall VMware tools before starting VM migration from ESXi to Proxmox, you can uninstall it now. The basic method to uninstall VMware tools is going to Control Panel then Programs and Features. Select VMware tools in the list of installed programs and click Uninstall. Wait until the wizard uninstalls VMware tools. If the uninstallation wizard doesn't work, refer to VMware documentation about manual VMware tools uninstallation. You may need to delete registry entries and files manually. That's why it is better to uninstall VMware tools before starting VM migration. VMware tools are uninstalled in the Windows guest operating system. Let's install VirtIO drivers. Go to the virtual DVD drive in the guest operating system of the migrated VM. Select the x86 or x64 installer based on the guest OS version and run the MSI installer file. Follow the VirtIO drivers installation wizard. The installation is straightforward. You should select the needed components and hit Next to continue. Once the installation has been completed, click Finish to close the setup wizard. We have finished the VM migration by using the first method, which requires a set of manual steps but provides maximum control. There is a second, newer method where some of the steps are automated. The second method can be useful in specific scenarios. Let's migrate a virtual machine from an ESXi host to a Proxmox host using the second method. We need to update Proxmox to get the VSphere import tools package for VM migration from ESXi to Proxmox. The current Proxmox version is 8.1.4. The VM migration feature is available starting from August 1, 2010 in test and no subscription repositories. Let's update Proxmox. Select a Proxmox host in the navigation pane and click Updates. In the Updates section, go to Repositories to manage software repositories with update packages for Proxmox and Debian. You see a notification that no subscription repositories are not recommended for production environments. Take this information into account before you continue. Click Add to add a software repository. Click OK when you see a notification message. Select a test repository in the drop-down list. Click Add. We can see a notification message that the test repository may pull in unstable updates and is not recommended for production use. We proceed to the next steps. Click Reload to reload the list of repositories. We can list software repositories and see the recently added test repository. Go to Updates and click Refresh to refresh the list of software packages and add packages from the recently added test repository. The new packages are being added to the package list. The package refresh operation is finished. The package database has been updated. We can close the window with the output. We are ready to upgrade the host now. Go to Updates and click the Upgrade button to upgrade the Proxmox host. Type Y and press Enter to continue and upgrade the Proxmox host. Wait until all required packages are downloaded and installed. The package's installation has been completed. The system is up to date. We can run the command to check whether the ESXi import tool was installed after finishing the upgrade. We are checking whether the vSphere import tools package has been installed. Great, the needed package has been installed. As a kernel update was installed, we need to reboot the host. Wait until the Proxmox host is rebooted. Once the Proxmox host has been upgraded to a new version, we can start configuring VM migration from ESXi. The version is 8.2.4 now. We need to connect an ESXi datastore with the source virtual machine to our Proxmox host. Go to Data Center then Storage and click Add. Click ESXi to add ESXi datastores. This menu entry is available after the Proxmox upgrade. We need to enter the required ESXi parameters. There are two datastores on the source ESXi host. Our original virtual machine is located on the ESXi datastore called datastore 50. In the ID field, enter a display name for the ESXi host you add, for example, ESXi 31. Enter the IP address of the ESXi host in the server field. The IP address is 192.168.101.31 in our example. Enter root as the username for ESXi and enter the root password. Select your Proxmox host in the nodes drop-down list. We have one Proxmox host, called PVE in this example. We can skip certificate verification. Click Add. The ESXi host is now displayed in the list of storage connected to the Proxmox virtual environment. You can double-click the ESXi entry and edit this entry if needed. Ensure that the original VM is powered off. Otherwise, shut down the original VM before starting migration of this VM to Proxmox. We will migrate a Debian VM to Proxmox using the second method. The Debian VM is stored on datastore 50 attached to the ESXi host. Ensure that the original VMware VM doesn't have any VM snapshots. Our Debian virtual machine does not have any snapshots. Everything is ready for VM migration. Let's proceed. Select the source ESXi host in the navigation pane of the Proxmox web interface. The list of VMware VM configuration files in the VMX format is displayed. This is a list of VMs residing on this ESXi host. Virtual machines on all datastores attached to this ESXi host are displayed. Select a configuration file of the needed VM and click Import. We are selecting the Debian 12 VM to import to Proxmox. The Import Guest window opens. Enter the VM ID, for example, 102, it must be the unused ID on this host. The VM migration tool we installed with the Proxmox upgrade automatically reads the VM configuration from the original VMX file. This Proxmox VM migration tool recreates the identical configuration for the new destination VM on the Proxmox host. You can adjust the VM settings if needed. Don't select the Live Import option. Live Import is not equal to VM Live Migration. When this option is selected, a Proxmox host starts the destination VM when it estimates that enough data was transferred to start the guest OS of the VM and continue the VM migration process. Optionally, you can edit settings in the Advanced tab. You can configure a virtual disk controller, CD/DVD drive options, and options for network interfaces in the Advanced tab. Click Import to proceed with VM migration from the ESXi host to the Proxmox host. You can monitor how data is transferred during the VM migration in the Output tab of the Task Viewer window. The original VMDK virtual disk was converted to the native Proxmox QEMU virtual disk format called QCOW2 during migration. The Task OK message means that the VM migration from ESXi to Proxmox has been completed successfully. We can close the Task Viewer window. The Debian 12 VM is displayed in the list of Proxmox VMs after migration. The migrated VM is ready to start. Click the Start button to start the virtual machine. Log in to the guest operating system, Debian in this case. If you did not uninstall VMware tools, uninstall them. The guest Linux boot stage was successful after VM migration. Install VirtIO drivers and QEMU guest agent to run the VM with better performance and experience in Proxmox. Don't forget to back up your workloads wherever they reside. NAKIVO Backup and Replication is a comprehensive solution for today's virtual and hybrid infrastructures. The solution supports both VMware vSphere and Proxmox. Download the full featured free trial of NAKIVO Backup and Replication and start protecting your VMs today.